Welcome to Global Tax Talks Tax in 60 Seconds. I'm Will Morris, and here are some things to watch out for in the coming week. A couple of months ago, I mentioned my favorite and probably only Lenin quote about decades where nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. Over the past week or two, though, it feels more like it's been days where decades happen. Anyway, first, expect to hear more about US tariffs, which dominated the news last week. Having imposed 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, those were quickly paused for a month, pending strengthened border arrangements between those countries and the US. But 10% tariffs on China goods did go into effect, and China then retaliated both with targeted tariffs, for example on energy products, as well as restricting, for example, the export of certain key minerals. The expectation is that the EU will also shortly be hit by tariffs based on statements by the US administration. As we said before, while tariffs aren't technically taxes, they act quite like them sometimes, as well as bleeding over directly into tax policy, for example on digital services taxes, where Belgium has just announced its intention to unilaterally design a DST by 2027 at the latest, if no agreement can be reached at the European or international level. Expect also to hear more about the UN process towards an international tax convention after the US quite definitively withdrew from the process last week. In a statement at last week's New York meetings, the US delegate stated, "We do not plan to participate further in this organizational session, process, or negotiating a text. We reject the very nature of these discussions," he continued. "The process will lead to a convention that would unacceptably hamper nations' ability to enact tax policies that serve the interests of their citizens, businesses, and workers." Now, what effect this will have is unclear, although Poland, speaking on behalf of the EU, also said that if the committee moved ahead with a simple majority decision-making process, then, and I quote, "this might affect EU member states' willingness to participate in the future convention." Finally, on Pillar 2, several members of the US House Ways and Means Committee wrote to President Trump reiterating their willingness to back retaliatory measures involving both the use of current legislation, Section 891, as well as new measures, thus foreshadowing future congressional action. And in another piece of very interesting but less reported news, India in last week's budget made no moves to introduce Pillar 2. The language a senior Indian revenue official used to describe that was quite revealing. When asked why there had been no action, he replied, "Many jurisdictions have actually carried on with the changes, but India hasn't. But with the US announcing exit from the deal, we need to really see how it goes forward. Therefore," he said, "there is no need for us at this moment to push it. We will evaluate it." I mentioned critical mass last week. India staying on the sidelines could be quite important. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and come back next week so that you stay global tax ready.